The void between stars had always carried whispers, but this night it carried a roar. A black shape slid from the abyss, larger than any warship left in human records, its hull gleaming like a fragment of night torn loose. Every scanner went blind as it passed. Every transmission stuttered and failed, and every beating heart that saw it knew the truth. Humanity's legacy had returned. The black ship Eternal had come back from the dark, and it was not here for peace. For centuries, the alien oppressors who had claimed our galaxy believed they had crushed the last spark of human defiance. They burned our colonies, erased our fleets, and declared that humanity's time had ended. But stories survived in the shadows. Rumors of a war vessel built in humanity's final desperate hour, hidden away before the fall. A vessel not of metal and engines alone, but of something far more enduring. It was said the black ship could never truly die, that it would sleep until the galaxy called it back. Tonight the call had been answered. Across a battered outpost near the edge of a dying star, men and women froze as their sensors screamed warnings. The ship dwarfed the station, eclipsing starlight, its silhouette jagged with scars of wars fought in an age no one remembered. No one living had seen its like. Yet its presence stirred something deep in the human spirit, as if generations of memory whispered through bone and blood. Some dropped to their knees in awe. Others clenched their fists in fury, knowing at last the tide might turn. The aliens had grown careless over the centuries. They enslaved, they exploited, they hollowed out entire worlds to feed their empire. They believed humans broken beyond repair. But the return of the black ship Eternal shattered that illusion. It was more than a vessel, it was a promise, forged in fire and vengeance. Inside its ancient frame, systems awakened, weapons hummed, and archives lit up with the voices of those who had built it long ago. They had not built it for survival. They had built it for return. As the first light of its engines bled across the void, alien patrols moved in, their ships sleek and arrogant, unprepared for what was to come. They hailed the giant, demanding its surrender, their voices heavy with the arrogance of long rule. The black ship did not answer. Instead, the silence broke with a single pulse of power that split the nearest patrol craft in half. No warning, no declaration, only action, the kind humanity had been denied for too long. In the control hub of the outpost, a young officer stared at the wreckage blooming across the dark. He had never seen humanity win, never believed such a thing possible. Yet here it was, unfolding before his eyes. "It's fighting for us," he whispered, though no one could explain how or why or what force guided the ancient vessel now awake. Was it crewed by something human, or did it move on its own? Was it an echo of the past, or a ghost answering the cries of its people? The oppressors panicked. Fleets were scrambled from nearby sectors, ships converging in swarms. For generations, they had taught humanity fear. Now, for the first time in living memory, fear passed to them. Their formations broke as the black ship moved with impossible precision, a relic of old war doctrine blended with something alien in its silence. Its hull drank in fire and returned it 1,000-fold, its cannons cutting through metal and bone alike. Each explosion lit the void, a chain of burning stars marking the return of vengeance. Whispers spread faster than the light of battle. Across hidden colonies and mining worlds, across enslaved outposts and prison camps, humanity stirred. The news was carried in broken signals, in smuggled transmissions, in hurried words passed by those who had dared to hope. "The black ship is real," they said. "It has returned. Our war is not over." For the first time in centuries, those words no longer felt like myth. They felt like destiny. But destiny came with questions. Who commanded the black ship Eternal? Was it truly the last captains of humanity, preserved in some unknown way, steering their vessel back to the living? Or had the ship itself become something more, an intelligence born of war and memory? And if so, could such a force be trusted? The aliens had their reason to fear, but humanity too now faced an unknown. A savior or a storm? As the battle near the outpost raged on, the ship slowed, its weapons falling silent for the briefest of moments. Then, with an almost deliberate grace, it turned its massive hull toward the human outpost that had borne witness to its arrival. Every system inside the station went dead, drowned under its shadow. The crew held their breath, unsure if the vessel had come as liberator or executioner. The officer who had spoken before stood at the viewport, hands trembling, his reflection caught against the vast, dark frame of the ship. For a heartbeat, he felt as if the vessel was staring back at him. Then a transmission cut through the silence, not in the harsh language of their alien masters, but in a voice that carried the weight of centuries. The words were simple, human, and final. "We have returned." The outpost erupted in cries of relief, terror, disbelief. The aliens regrouped, unleashing fire that shook the void. But the black ship Eternal pressed forward, its hull blazing with defiance, erasing oppressors as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. And yet, beneath the thunder of battle, a deeper question lingered. The ship had come back to strike fear into alien hearts, to erase the chains laid upon our species. But what else did it want? Did it serve the humans of today, or only the ghosts of yesterday? As wreckage burned across the stars and the galaxy held its breath, the truth remained cloaked in shadow. Humanity's war vessel had returned, but whether it came as salvation or as something far more dangerous was a question yet unanswered. And the galaxy was about to learn that some legacies do not return quietly. They return eternal. Across the galaxy, signals raced from one system to another, broken fragments of words spreading like wildfire. The message was simple but unstoppable. The black ship Eternal had returned. It was no longer myth, no longer a story whispered in dark corners. Humanity's ancient war vessel was awake, moving across the stars with the power of a storm. Yet with every whisper of hope came an edge of fear, because no one knew what truly commanded it, or why it had chosen to reappear now. On the outpost where it had first revealed itself, the crew still stood in shock. The massive ship remained outside their viewports, unmoving now, a looming shadow against the dead light of a ruined patrol fleet. The officer who had heard its voice still could not shake the feeling that it had spoken directly to him. The words had been clear, human, yet heavy with an echo as though carried across centuries. He replayed them again and again in his mind. "We have returned." Searching for meaning, searching for intent. It did not say I, it said we. Whispers spread among the station's survivors. Some said it was guided by humans preserved in secret, frozen long ago to be awakened in the hour of need. Others believed it was controlled by an artificial mind, something ancient and vast that had been programmed with one purpose: vengeance. A few dared to suggest the truth might be stranger still, that the ship itself had become something alive, carrying within it the memories of every battle, every death, every sacrifice that had gone into its making. The officer tried to quiet his thoughts as his commander called for calm. Their station had little defense, little worth, yet it had survived because of the ship's presence. Now, however, they faced a decision. Should they try to reach out? Should they attempt to connect, to ask for guidance? Or should they stay silent, fearful that drawing its gaze could bring destruction as easily as salvation? No one knew, and no one wanted to take the blame for a wrong choice. Meanwhile, across occupied human worlds, the oppressors scrambled. Their fleets mobilized faster than they had in decades. The sight of their patrol ships burning had sent waves of unease through their empire. For too long, they had assumed humanity beaten. The return of the black ship Eternal cracked the surface of their confidence. They remembered its legend as clearly as humans did. It had been built in desperation, not as a single vessel, but as a weapon of legacy. A ship meant to endure beyond any fall. And now that it had awakened, they feared what might follow. But humanity was not united in how to view this return. In the hidden colonies where small groups of survivors lived under alien rule, people argued. Some said this was their moment to rise, to join the ship and reclaim what had been lost. Others warned that rushing to follow something so mysterious could doom them again. After all, what if it had its own agenda? What if it was not here to free them, but to finish a war long dead, regardless of who stood in the way? The officer on the outpost found himself restless as hours passed with no further message from the vessel. He thought of the ship's size, of the scars carved across its armor, of the silence it carried. He thought of the generations that had lived and died believing humanity was powerless. Now that power had returned, he wondered if humans were ready to wield it, or if the ship itself would decide what should be done. He could not help but imagine that somewhere, deep inside its hull, there were voices watching, waiting, choosing their moment to speak again. Meanwhile, across occupied human worlds, the oppressors scrambled. Their fleets mobilized faster than they had in decades. The sight of their patrol ships burning had sent waves of unease through their empire. For too long, they had assumed humanity beaten. The return of the Black Ship Eternal cracked the surface of their confidence. They remembered its legend as clearly as humans did. It had been built in desperation, not as a single vessel, but as a weapon of legacy. A ship meant to endure beyond any fall. And now that it had awakened, they feared what might follow. But humanity was not united in how to view this return. In the hidden colonies where small groups of survivors lived under alien rule, people argued. Some said this was their moment to rise, to join the ship and reclaim what had been lost. Others warned that rushing to follow something so mysterious could doom them again. After all, what if it had its own agenda? What if it was not here to free them, but to finish a war long dead, regardless of who stood in the way? The officer on the outpost found himself restless as hours passed with no further message from the vessel. He thought of the ship's size, of the scars carved across its armor, of the silence it carried. He thought of the generations that had lived and died believing humanity was powerless. Now that power had returned, he wondered if humans were ready to wield it, or if the ship itself would decide what should be done. He could not help but imagine that somewhere, deep inside its hull, there were voices watching, waiting, choosing their moment to speak again. The Black Ship Eternal moved once more, slow and deliberate, its engines glowing faint against the backdrop of wreckage. It did not fire. It did not threaten. Yet every human on the station held their breath as it turned its bow toward the wider galaxy. The ship seemed to consider them for one final moment, as if deciding whether they mattered. Then, with a deep vibration that shook the outpost's walls, it leapt into the dark, vanishing beyond the reach of sensors, leaving silence in its wake. But the silence it left was not empty. It was filled with questions, filled with fear, filled with hope that cut like a blade. Humanity's oppressors now hunted it, launching entire fleets to track its course. Human survivors whispered prayers and plans, unsure if this was a miracle or a warning. And deep within the memory of every watcher, one truth remained. The ship had promised it had returned. What it had returned for was still unknown. Far across the galaxy, in the ruins of a once great human world stripped bare by alien overlords, a small band of survivors huddled around a stolen transmitter. Their leader was an old man who remembered stories his grandparents told, stories of humanity's final stand, of the desperate creation of the Black Ship. He had grown up believing those were only tales meant to comfort broken people. But when the transmission reached them, when the voice declared, "We have returned," he wept. For him, the past was alive again, and with it came the chance of justice. Yet in his heart, even he wondered if justice would be enough, or if vengeance would consume them all. The aliens tightened their grip on occupied territories, fearing rebellion. Patrols doubled, punishment grew harsher, entire settlements silenced at the first sign of resistance. They believed fear would smother hope before it grew. But fear had always been their greatest weapon, and now fear was slipping from their grasp. The return of the Black Ship Eternal made their empire tremble, because even they knew nothing returns without purpose. In a chamber far from the front lines, among the highest rulers of the alien dominion, debates grew heated. Some demanded the ship be destroyed at all costs, even if it meant burning entire sectors to root it out. Others warned that such action could ignite the very uprising they feared. For the first time in centuries, cracks appeared in their unity. Humanity had always been a scattered, broken people, easy to control. But with one ship, one voice, one return, the balance of power shifted in ways no calculation could predict. The officer back on the outpost could not sleep. He stood again at the viewport, staring into the stars where the ship had vanished. His hands shook as he replayed that single phrase in his mind. The voice had not sounded like one person. It had been layered as though thousands spoke as one, bound by time and memory. He wondered if that was the true meaning of eternal, not a ship alone, but the soul of a people carried forward. If that was true, then humanity was no longer waiting for saviors. They had already become one, bound into a vessel that refused to fade. Yet doubt lingered. What if the Black Ship did not see the humans of today as its people? What if it still fought a war from the past, blind to what centuries had changed? What if, in its fury, it could no longer tell friend from foe? The stars beyond remained silent, the mystery deeper than ever. Humanity had been given a sign, but not an answer. The oppressors prepared for war, the survivors prepared for hope, and the galaxy itself held its breath. The Black Ship Eternal was awake. The question now was not whether it could win battles, it already had, but what kind of future it would bring in its wake. And as the echoes of its return spread farther with every passing hour, one truth became clear. The galaxy was not ready for what had been unleashed. The Black Ship Eternal vanished into the dark, but its shadow lingered over every corner of the galaxy. Rumors spread faster than light itself, carried in fractured signals and whispered conversations. In hidden human colonies, the whispers became sparks of courage. In alien strongholds, those same whispers grew into knots of fear. Both sides knew the return of the war vessel meant change, though no one yet knew what kind. The first signs of the conflict came quietly. Alien fleets, usually cold and disciplined, began to fracture under pressure. Patrol ships deserted their posts, unwilling to face the vessel that had erased entire squadrons without effort. In occupied human cities, guards tightened their grip, and punishments grew harsher, as if cruelty itself could erase the idea of hope. But the opposite happened. For the first time in centuries, humans lifted their heads and dared to imagine freedom. The conflict was not only between fleets and firepower, it was between belief and control. At the edge of a mining world, a group of enslaved humans gathered in a dark cavern. They had stolen a piece of forbidden technology, a receiver tuned to distant signals. Night after night they listened, praying for proof. And one night the proof came. The message was broken, filled with static, but the words were unmistakable. "We have returned." A woman among them closed her eyes as tears ran down her face. She had lost her parents to the alien overlords years ago, and for the first time she felt they might have left behind more than grief. The ship was not just a weapon, it was a promise. She vowed to spread the word, even if it cost her life. In the Dominion's High Council chambers, the aliens debated in rage and fear. Their empire had endured because it had crushed every ember of rebellion before it grew. Now, faced with something older than their rule, their unity faltered. Some demanded the Black Ship be destroyed with overwhelming force, even if entire human populations had to be burned alongside it. Others argued that such destruction would only make legends stronger. The conflict among their leaders weakened them, though they would never admit it aloud. They had underestimated humanity once. They would not make the same mistake again, or so they believed. Meanwhile, on the human outpost where the ship had first appeared, the young officer could not shake his unease. He replayed the encounter in his mind, the scars across the ship's hull, the silence before it spoke, the weight of its words. The more he thought about it, the less he believed it was guided by a single voice. There had been something layered in that message, something collective. It haunted him because he did not know if that meant it was guided by the living or by something beyond them. He began to write down everything he remembered, desperate to preserve the details before time twisted them into rumor. Days passed, and the ship struck again. This time it emerged near a fortified alien garrison, a system thought to be untouchable. Within hours, the garrison burned. Entire fleets scrambled and fell, their wreckage littering the void like broken teeth. But when human survivors cheered, believing the ship would turn to free them, it did not. It simply vanished once more, leaving them behind in chains. This created a new tension among humanity itself. Some believed the ship was testing them, waiting for humans to rise on their own. Others whispered darker fears, that the ship did not care for the living at all. Only for the war it had been built to fight. On a prison world where humans were forced to mine the core of a dead moon, a boy overheard guards speaking of the Black Ship's attack. He told the story to others that night, his voice trembling with excitement. For the first time, the prisoners did not speak in hushed tones. They spoke boldly, loudly, even as guards struck them down. The story of the ship gave them something stronger than chains could break, a reason to endure. The aliens saw this, and their fear deepened. They unleashed a new campaign of terror, striking down entire settlements to prove their dominance. But the harder they struck, the faster rebellion grew. Humanity had always survived under the weight of cruelty, but with the Black Ship eternal as a symbol, survival was no longer enough. Now they wanted to fight. The young officer's commander sent him on a mission: gather intelligence, travel among hidden colonies, and learn what humans were saying. He moved from one settlement to another, hearing the same refrain repeated in different voices. The people were waiting for the ship to choose them. They believed it would come for the worthy, that it carried not only weapons, but judgment. The officer grew troubled. Was this vessel the return of hope or the beginning of something far more dangerous? At the same time, deep within the alien council, a desperate plan was born. They would build a weapon capable of matching the Black Ship Eternal, something vast and terrible. But such a project would take time, and time was no longer theirs to command. Every delay cost them more control. Their once unbreakable empire had begun to crack, and the sound of that fracture echoed across the stars. The Black Ship itself seemed to move with purpose, yet its pattern was unreadable. It struck alien fleets without mercy, destroyed outposts without pause, then disappeared for days at a time. In the silence between battles, fear grew on both sides. What was it waiting for? What guided its hand? Some humans prayed it would appear above their skies and break their chains. Others feared its silence more than the enemy's wrath. Among the enslaved miners, the woman who had first heard the ship's voice began organizing. She told her people they could not wait to be saved. The Black Ship was not here to free them. It was here to remind them they must free themselves. Her words spread, and small acts of rebellion began to ignite. Tools became weapons. Guards vanished into the dark. Every victory, however small, was claimed in the ship's name. The officer, watching all of this unfold, felt torn. He wanted to believe in the ship, wanted to believe it had returned for the living. Yet everywhere he went, he saw humans projecting their hopes onto something they did not understand. And in the back of his mind, he remembered how it had turned toward his outpost, how for a breathless moment he had felt its attention fixed on him. What if it chose not by loyalty, but by something else entirely? What if humanity had no say at all in what came next? The aliens tightened their grip. Humanity rose in secret, and the Black Ship Eternal moved like a shadow of fate across the stars. No one controlled it, no one commanded it, and yet it commanded everything. The conflict was no longer just about a ship. It was about who humanity would become when faced with a power that could either save them or consume them. And as the ship prepared to strike once more, deeper into enemy space than ever before, both sides braced themselves. The galaxy knew the real war had only just begun. The galaxy trembled as the Black Ship Eternal cut deeper into enemy territory. Each time it appeared, fleets vanished, strongholds crumbled, and fear spread like wildfire. Yet for all its power, it remained a mystery, a shadow without a face. Humanity whispered prayers and raised their heads higher, daring to believe freedom was possible. The alien dominion, once unshakable, began to fracture under the weight of panic. But both sides knew the same truth. The storm was only beginning. The first great counterstrike came without warning. The aliens gathered their largest fleets, drawing ships from across entire sectors, and forged them into a single force. It was a wall of steel and fire, thousands of vessels converging to trap the Black Ship. The order was clear: destroy it, no matter the cost. They believed numbers would crush what no single fleet could face. Across the stars, the news of this massive mobilization reached human ears, and with it came both dread and hope. If the ship survived, the Dominion would never recover. If it fell, the last spark of rebellion would die with it. On the mining world, the woman who had begun rallying her people felt her hands shake as she heard whispers of the battle to come. She told her followers they must be ready. If the ship fought for them, they had to prove worthy. But in her heart, she feared. What if the ship's fury destroyed everything in its path, humans and aliens alike? Still, she clenched her jaw and whispered to herself, "We have waited too long to cower now." The young officer, traveling from settlement to settlement, felt the weight of every conversation. Each world was alive with tension, people clinging to fragments of information, their eyes wide with anticipation. He wanted to believe, but doubt gnawed at him. He remembered the silence after the ship's first battles, the way it vanished without explanation. He feared it was not fighting for them, but for a war only it understood. Yet when he looked into the faces of those who listened to him speak of the ship, he could not bring himself to voice that doubt. Hope was all they had, and he would not be the one to break it. The aliens unleashed their trap near a dead star at the edge of a forgotten system. There, the black ship Eternal appeared, as if it had been drawn to the battlefield by instinct. The fleets closed around it in a vast circle, layers upon layers of warships, their weapons primed. For a moment, silence stretched across the void. Then the first volleys erupted, a storm of fire crashing against the ship's black hull. The galaxy held its breath. On distant outposts and hidden colonies, humans crowded around screens and transmitters, watching what fragments of the battle could be intercepted. They saw explosions bloom like dying suns, heard static filled with desperate alien orders. They saw the shadow of the black ship standing alone against thousands, its armor burning but unbroken. For every strike it endured, it answered with devastation, tearing through lines that had never been breached. Yet the fleets pressed in, layer after layer, determined to drown it in fire. The officer found himself in a crowded hall, standing among refugees as they watched the battle unfold. Every face was pale, every hand clenched tight. He felt his chest tighten with each second. If the ship fell, their last chance fell with it. And yet, as he watched it carve through the enemy, something else struck him. The ship did not move like one vessel. It moved like many, its responses too swift, too layered, as if guided by countless minds at once. He whispered to himself the thought he dared not share. Maybe it was not a ship at all, but a legion. On the prison world, the boy who had once told stories of the ship now stood at the front of a gathering, shouting above the roar of miners. "It is fighting for us!" he cried, his small voice fierce. Around him, the prisoners raised their fists, their chains clattering in unison. Even as guards rushed to strike them down, they did not stop. The sound of rebellion filled the air, echoing against stone walls. Their hope grew louder than their fear. The alien dominion's leaders watched the battle with dread. Every plan they had crafted, every calculation they trusted, fell apart as the black ship refused to die. They hurled more fleets into the storm, sacrificing ships by the hundreds, but the vessel carved through them with relentless precision. For the first time in centuries, the rulers of the empire knew fear, not of humans, but of the past rising against them. The woman on the mining world gathered her followers in the dark tunnels, speaking words heavy with fire. "The ship cannot do this alone," she told them. "It awakens because we awaken. If we remain silent, its return will be wasted." Her people listened, and their fear shifted into something sharper. Across the tunnels, they began to prepare, smuggling weapons, plotting their first open strike. The ship's battle had not only weakened the enemy's fleets, it had shaken the chains of the enslaved, but even as hope surged, shadows deepened. Reports spread that the black ship's fury left nothing behind. No survivors, no mercy, only ruins where fleets once stood. Some humans began to whisper in doubt. Was it truly their savior, or was it a storm that would sweep them all away? The officer heard these doubts too, and they echoed the fear already in his heart. He thought of the moment when the ship had turned toward his outpost, the feeling that it had judged him. What if it judged humanity unworthy in the end? The battle at the Dead Star grew darker. Entire fleets collapsed under the ship's onslaught, but still they came, desperate, endless. The black ship Eternal moved like a shadow through fire, its cannons lighting the void, its armor cracked but unyielding. Each strike carried the weight of centuries, each blast a reminder that humanity was not erased. Yet for all its strength, the circle was closing, the fleets converging, determined to trap it once and for all. Across the galaxy, millions watched and waited. Prisoners whispered in defiance. Miners sharpened stolen blades. Refugees pressed closer to screens, hearts pounding with each flash of light. The Dominion poured its fury into the void, while the black ship answered with silence and fire. The tension grew unbearable. Every second felt like the edge of a knife. The woman in the mines stood before her people, torchlight flickering across her face. Do you see what they fear? She cried. Not us, not our chains. They fear the black ship because it carries everything they tried to erase. If they are willing to burn their own fleets to stop it, then we must be willing to rise beside it. Her words lit a fire in her people, and rebellion spread from one tunnel to the next. For the first time, human hands turned their tools into weapons not in secret, but in open defiance. The officer, riding aboard a freighter filled with refugees, intercepted broken signals from the front. Reports told of the black ship tearing through ambush after ambush, its weapons blazing brighter than before. Yet every victory came at a cost. Its hull was scarred deeper now, pieces of armor falling away like shards of night. It did not matter. It pressed on, cutting through the dark toward its final destination. The officer realized what he feared most. It was not retreating, not escaping. It was drawing the enemy closer, forcing them to spend everything, to commit every fleet they had. Whatever waited at the end of its path, it was meant for this very moment. The battlefield revealed itself at the edge of a dead system where human ships had fallen generations ago. Wreckage drifted like a silent memorial, twisted frames of vessels that once carried the last hope of humanity. As the black ship entered the graveyard, the alien fleets closed in, surrounding it once more. But this time there was no retreat. This time it had reached the place it had been seeking since its return. The enemy unleashed everything. Cannons that split moons, beams that seared across the void, swarms of fighters blotting out the stars. The black ship answered with silence, then lit up with a roar that shook the void. Its cannons ignited in sequence, tearing through the circle with precision. The wreckage of ancient human ships drifted between them, and for a moment it seemed as if the dead themselves fought beside it. To those who watched from afar, it looked like ghosts rising from the grave, humanity's fallen fleets lending their strength to the battle. The officer stared at the transmissions in disbelief. It was not just an illusion. The ship was linking with the wreckage, drawing power, reawakening fragments of the past. Engines that had been cold for centuries flickered with sudden fire. Rusted weapons turned toward the enemy, firing one last time. The Black Ship Eternal had not come here to fight alone. It had come to awaken the battlefield itself. Panic swept through the Dominion's commanders. Their fleets, already strained, now faced not one vessel but the wrath of an entire graveyard turned against them. The sky became a storm of fire and metal, explosions blooming like suns as alien warships shattered. The black ship cut through the chaos, its weapons tearing apart their massive carrier in a blast that split the void in half. Humanity's legacy, once silent, now roared with vengeance. Across enslaved worlds, the news spread faster than chains could bind. Humans rose in unison, rebellions breaking open across the Dominion. Miners seized control of tunnels, prisoners overran their guards, hidden colonies struck openly at alien patrols. The woman who had spoken in the tunnels led her people to the surface, where for the first time in her life she saw the stars without fear. Above them, battles lit the sky, and she raised her fist. "This is our time!" she shouted, and her people followed. Yet in the heart of victory, a deeper truth began to reveal itself. The officer watched the battle unfold and felt the weight of a terrible realization. The black ship was not only awakening the wreckage, it was awakening something else. The voices within it, layered and countless, grew louder. The message from the beginning, "We have returned," now echoed with clarity. It was not speaking of a crew or of a single mind. It was the voice of humanity itself, preserved within the ship. Generations of memory, sacrifice, and will had been woven into its frame. The black ship was not just a weapon. It was a vessel of souls. The twist sent a chill through him. The ship did not simply fight for humanity. It was humanity, in a form no one had imagined. And now, as it unleashed its full power, he wondered what it wanted in return. Could those who live today truly guide something born from the dead? Or would it follow its own path, a path shaped by the fury of centuries? The climax of the battle raged on. Alien fleets crumbled, their last reserves burning in the graveyard of stars. The Black Ship Eternal stood at the center, its hull fractured, its light blazing brighter than ever, as if the souls within refused to fade. The officer gripped the console, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not just fighting for us. It's fighting as us, around him, Refugees wept, laughed, prayed, some in joy, others in fear of what this meant. At last, the Dominion's fleets broke, their discipline shattered, their will to fight extinguished. They fled into the void, leaving the battlefield in ruins. For the first time in centuries, humanity stood victorious. The enslaved rose in open rebellion, the oppressors reeled, and the galaxy shifted on its axis. The Black Ship Eternal had delivered what no one thought possible, a chance at freedom. But in the silence that followed, the unexpected twist revealed itself. The ship, instead of turning to the surviving humans, instead of guiding them or speaking again, began to move deeper into the void, beyond the graveyard, beyond the reach of any chart. Its voice returned, echoing across every channel, heavy and final. "We are not finished. The war is not here alone. We must go where they came from." The officer felt his blood run cold. The Dominion, the empire that had enslaved humanity for so long, might not be the true enemy. The Black Ship was pointing farther, to something beyond the galaxy itself. Humanity's war had only begun, and the vessel they had thought was their savior was already leaving, already reaching toward a conflict far larger than any of them had imagined. The battlefield fell silent, but the tension only grew. Humanity had won a victory, yet it was no ending. The ship had returned not to free them alone, but to carry the fight into the dark beyond. And as its silhouette vanished once more into the abyss, every human heart knew the truth. They had been given freedom, but they had also been given a burden. The Black Ship Eternal was not done, and it would demand more than anyone was ready to give. Would you like me to carry the final part into a resolution epilogue, tying up the human rebellions and the aftermath while leaving the larger threat looming as the hook for continuation? The battlefield of broken stars slowly drifted into silence, the fires of battle fading into ash. Wreckage floated in endless patterns, the remains of fleets that had once seemed invincible. Among the shattered hulls and silent debris, the Black Ship Eternal lingered for only a moment longer before it turned and began its slow passage into the deeper void. Its voice, carried across fractured channels, had left a final command in the minds of all who heard it. The war was not yet done. Then it was gone, leaving behind both awe and questions that would echo for generations. On the mining world, where rebellion had first broken open, the people gathered outside their tunnels. The woman who had rallied them stood beneath the starlight, her face pale but her eyes bright with resolve. For the first time, the sky above them was free of alien patrols. Smoke still rose from the battle that had raged in orbit, but the silence it left behind was sweeter than any sound they had ever known. She looked at her people, their chains cut, their tools now weapons, and she told them simply, "We are no longer waiting. The ship has done its part. Now it is our turn." Her words became the beginning of something greater than rebellion. It became the beginning of rebuilding. In scattered prisons across the Dominion, word of the victory spread like fire. The boy who had once whispered stories of the ship now stood taller, leading others to freedom. Guards deserted, their courage broken by the knowledge that the Dominion had fallen at the graveyard of stars. The prisoners took control of their own fate, seizing ships, taking back their skies. The boy, his voice raw, told them the ship had not left them. It had shown them the way. The Black Ship Eternal had awakened not just to fight, but to remind humanity that they still carried strength of their own. The officer who had witnessed its first return sat alone aboard a freighter drifting above the ruins of another world. He had seen everything, its silence, its fury, its awakening of the graveyard. He had heard its final message, one that still weighed heavy on his heart. He wrote down his account in full, not as a soldier, but as a witness. He wanted humanity to remember not only the battles, but also the questions the ship had left behind. "It fought as us," he wrote, "and it carries what we lost. But it is not here to hold our hands. It has given us freedom, and now it asks what we will do with it." His words spread quietly among survivors, copied and carried across ships, becoming part of the story of the Black Ship itself. Across the Dominion, cracks became collapse. Worlds once ruled with iron chains now slipped free, their people rising in the chaos. The alien rulers, shaken by the loss of their greatest fleets, withdrew into their core systems, desperate to hold what little they could. For the first time in centuries, humanity was no longer the hunted. They were the ones moving forward, shaping their own destiny. Yet with victory came uncertainty. Without the Black Ship to guide them, they would have to stand on their own. Still, the ship had left its mark. Across every settlement, across every freed colony, people spoke of the same truth. They were not alone in their struggle. The voices within the Black Ship were proof of that. Their ancestors had not been erased. Their sacrifices had not been forgotten. Every scar carved into the ship's armor, every whisper of its voice, carried the memory of those who had come before. Humanity's past had returned, not to bind the living, but to remind them of who they were. That knowledge became their strength. The woman in the mines led her people to rebuild their world, turning tunnels into homes, scars into new beginnings. She told them they must be more than survivors now, they must be builders. The boy from the prison became a symbol of courage, his small voice remembered as the spark that had kept hope alive. The officer, weary but resolute, became a chronicler of the war, preserving the truth so it would not be twisted into myth. Each carried forward a piece of the Black Ship's legacy, proving that its return had not been in vain. Yet even as humanity began to rise, the final twist remained. The ship had spoken of a greater war, a threat beyond the Dominion. Its path into the void was not an escape, but a pursuit. The officer wondered what it meant, what lay beyond the stars they knew. Were the alien oppressors only servants of something greater? Was the true enemy still hidden, waiting in the dark? The questions would not be answered, not yet. But they gave humanity something more dangerous than fear. They gave them purpose. In time, the memory of the Black Ship Eternal became more than a story. It became a symbol etched into every flag, every oath, every dream of the free. Children grew up hearing of the night the ship returned, of the battle in the graveyard of stars, of the moment humanity rose from the ashes. Some believed it would come back again when they needed it most. Others believed it had already given them everything they required. But all agreed on one truth. It had proven that humanity could never truly be erased. The stars still carried scars, the wreckage of war drifting as a silent reminder of the cost. Yet among those ruins, ships bearing human hands began to move, not as slaves, but as explorers, settlers, and defenders. Where chains once bound them, now hope carried them forward. And though the Black Ship Eternal was gone, its shadow remained, a guide etched across the skies. The officer's final words in his account captured what many felt but could not express. We feared we were the last. We feared we had been forgotten. But the Black Ship showed us otherwise. It showed us that we are eternal, not because of metal or weapons, but because of memory, because of will. Whatever comes beyond these stars, we will face it as humans, unbroken, unforgotten. And so the story ended not with the silence of loss, but with the beginning of a new chapter. The Black Ship Eternal had carried humanity through fire and shadow, had awakened their courage and broken their chains. Its departure left behind more than freedom. It left behind a legacy. A reminder that humanity was never truly defeated, and that even in the darkest night they could rise again. The galaxy was scarred, the future uncertain, but for the first time in living memory, humans looked to the stars without fear. They had been given back their place among the endless night. And though the Black Ship Eternal was gone, its promise lived on, carried in every heart that dared to hope. Humanity was eternal too, and the war vessel that bore their legacy had made sure the galaxy would never forget it.